This is Pod Strangely Warmed, a place where we tell the good Methodist story, where we have conversations that invite followers of Jesus to seek after that loving, just, and free world that God imagines for us all, and have a little fun along the way. Hi, and welcome to Pod Strangely Warmed. I'm Daniel Hawkins, coming to you from some hidey hole of a room at First United Methodist Round Rock, also known as the site of the final Central Texas Annual Conference, number 158. Let that sink in just for a little bit. We are incredibly excited for what God has in front of us as a part of the Horizon Texas Conference, but we also celebrate what God has done over the last 158 years here in the Central Texas Conference. That's part of what we are doing. Celebrate what God has done while also looking forward to what God will do. As a part of our celebration here at Annual Conference, we're being taught incredibly well by Reverend Michael Gienger. Michael, thank you so much for being here at Annual Conference. Michael is the pastor at Central Church in Galveston. You have had the displeasure of having me and a number of other folks visit your campus to hear a little bit about the story of Central. You're also a good Baylor Bear. Sic 'em Bears. Sic 'em. Being based in Fort Worth, we are in the land of the TCU Horned Frogs. And
bless you.
Yes, bless me. You hear that? Bless me in the midst of, anyway, it's not
but
quite.
God will be with you, through the valley of shadow of death. And
absolutely. Even if that is like a purple death,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Anyway, Michael, thank you so much for being on the pod. It is a gift. We just finished your teaching session here in Annual Conference, and you shared what was a blessing to the Annual Conference. As we begin our time here on the pod, can you give us a little bit about your background and kind of what pushed you into ordained ministry to begin with, and then maybe a little bit in your life pre being appointed to Central?
Yeah, Daniel, thank you so much for letting me be here. What a privilege this is.
It's a joy.
And Central Texas has been such a kind, gracious. My annual conference is also during this week, so I was a little homesick from not being with my peeps. But everybody's been so hospitable, so it's been really great. So, originally I was born in Connecticut, moved to exotic Lake Charles, Louisiana after that, and then kind of settled in the South Houston area, grew up, went to high school there. Was kind of a normal church kid, went to youth group, and really it was there that my call kind of started to be formed. So I wasn't one of these, doing cocaine in the back of a bus in Mexico and God, whatever. It was like I went to church and a UM Army trip, which was a summer youth trip that we went on to go work on wheelchair ramps and how they convinced high school kids to go do that in the summer. I still don't understand.
My daughter just finished seventh grade, and she's on a UM Army trip this week with our church. So
fantastic.
I'm incredibly
pay money
thankful
to come work on things, and we did it, and it was delightful.
It's great.
So, but it was on a trip like that really God spoke to me through the client that we were working with, and he very explicitly said, this boy's going to be a preacher. And so that kind of woke some things up. So, I don't think about that prophetic in the sense that it was predicting the future, but it kind of, again, awakened something within me that it was like, oh, I might want to try that coat on and see how that fits. And then that was affirmed by people around me. And so went to Baylor, went to Waco, tried to find a church expression there, did not have much success in kind of the traditional churches. I was a religion major, so also had plenty of Jesus, I felt like, at the time. So just being very honest. But I stumbled into Church Under the Bridge in Waco. So with Jimmy Doral and that community it's very eclectic, homeless persons worshiping next to Baylor professors and students, and just beautiful. And so that, again, kind of lit up something within me. My imagination started rolling and began to think, what does church look like for people that don't fit the typical model of church? And and so a lot of that, I think, was kind of the kindling for what became Central, were these experiences of being with folks that had been historically marginalized, that found welcome, belonging, that I found deep friendship and relationship with. The best man at my wedding was a homeless guy from Waco, because we developed that kind of friendship and relationship. Chuck Rose is his name. Shout out to Chuck. And so, there was just something transformative that happened about seeing people up close, questioning a lot of the stereotypes that I've developed over the years, and remembering that the Spirit's been poured out on every one of us. Every one of us, not just fancy clergy folks like you and I, but people that are sleeping in dry 35, right? So that was kind of all pre-stuff. And then ended up at Central kind of on a whim and a chance. church came open. Galveston had, at one point, 5 United Methodist churches.
Okay.
One closed the year before. Central was on life support. So they were down to about 4 people on a Sunday morning.
Okay.
So when Mariah and I did get there, we grew by 50%.
Hey, that's church growth, baby. Evangelism award for you, Michael. There we go.
Our friends early on. And started this kind of hybrid restart, second campus, revitalization. We weren't sure exactly what it was going to be at that time, but we were really intentional about, does Galveston actually need another church? Or is it better for us to go partner with some of these other UMCs and just close this, sell it, use the assets to kind of support ministry? But we learned quickly there was no place for a lot of our folks on the island. And so what would it look like to do something that was intentionally geared towards folks that had been historically overlooked and underserved?
When you began at Central in Galveston, can you share with me something that 10 years in now that you did not know at the very beginning? Like when was Galveston a place of radical familiarity to you, or were you learning it as you were walking with the people?
No, I still don't know if Galveston is familiar after 10 years. It is an enigma. So, I mean, they have the whole culture. I don't know if you've heard of BOI before, but that's Born on the Island. And so that's a special designation if you were born on the island. I'm IBC, Island by Choice. So there's this even rift between people that have grew up in Galveston and not. I was told when I first got down there I was going to have to change my phone number to a Galveston County area code because people wouldn't trust you if you weren't totally embedded in that community. So it's taken a long time as an outsider to kind of figure out how this community functions and how it works. I did learn quickly that Born Off Island is also the same acronym, so I proudly claim BOI, so they don't need to know. That's fine. Now they know, I guess, because of the podcast. But so it's been this wonderful experience of learning and growing. And, I was 25 when we started the Central Project, still in the middle of seminary. Was a hot shot. Thought I had it all together. I'm going to bring Jesus to this godforsaken island kind of thing, only to discover that Jesus had already been working there, right? And my job was less about sort of putting Jesus in my backpack and carrying him down to the island, but more about discovering all the places that God was already at work and then creating these kinds of partnerships. So with that, it's been just constant exploration and sort of uncovering these layers and the way that our city works and how that interacts with our unsheltered population and what religious life is in Galveston, or these different seasons of tourist season and off season. And it's just been a fascinating experience. So, but so many lessons learned from church stuff and things that we thought we were doing early on that were just silly. So,
well, I think when we live with eyes wide open to learn and grow, right, we are defined by what we're learning, not by what we already know.
That's right.
And I think it is a meaningful expression. And I'm so glad that you still named 10 years in, right? In this room, in this building, you are the clear expert on Galveston, right?
Yeah.
And yet there's still so
much to learn.
Yeah.
And even in a place like Central, I mean, I've had 1 appointment, but I've served 10 churches, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's just gone through, and I think a lot of people listening could probably agree with that coming off of COVID and it's this constant reimagining. I always joke that flexibility is our second favorite F word at Central. So it's a great place where we're trying new things.
Behind food and fellowship.
That's faith, actually, is the first one.
Yes,
so.
Absolutely. Okay. Michael, for those who weren't here at annual conference, didn't get to hear you kind of tell a big chunk of the Central story, can you ground us a little bit in what Central's life looks like today? What is a week in the life of Central Church today?
So Central, the short version is in the mid-20th century was a church that had worship attendance of close to 1,000. It was a big church, kind of the who's who of everybody who's somebody in Galveston. Things began to shift. It was an aging congregation that was not thinking about the future. It was a historically white congregation in a neighborhood that was changing pretty dramatically and was not so subtly opposed to that, which is not a great way for making neighbors and bringing in new people. So that was the decline that happened down to that kind of 4 people, was just aging, some systemic racism things that were going on. So when we got there, we actually shut the church down for about 6 months. No corporate worship. We put boards up on the outside of the building to make it look like it was abandoned. So, I mean, it needed that kind of change of management in the community. Old white racist plays really well in some parts of the South, but it wasn't the vibe that we were going for. So,
Amen.
And then again, this relaunch towards new folks. So now, if you were to show up on a Sunday morning, We do a thing called piecemeal in the morning, which is kind of a play on words. So instead of P-I-E, it's P-E-A. So this piecemeal that we're having together, it's a meal that's cooked by people that were sleeping on the beach the night before, UTMB students, volunteers from our community, medical professionals, just this hodgepodge of humanity, all kind of doing that together. And then we all eat together, and we'll have conversation cards where people can get to know each other across a meal. I heard a sermon one time where the pastor said that the most important piece of furniture in someone's house was the kitchen table, because that's where everything happens, right? It's where bills get piled up. It's where conversations happen. And so kind of taking that model to Central, how do we prioritize our kind of kitchen space and the meals that can happen? And it served a very functional need. There was no place to get food on Sunday mornings for our unsheltered folks. And we're Methodists. We eat well, after all, right? So,
church calories don't count.
Yeah, exactly.
And bougie brunch is not an option.
Yeah. That was the best part about being shut down for 6 months, is I discovered this amazing thing called brunch. You know, who knew that there's this delightful thing that people do on Sundays besides church, you know? So
there's a world outside of church on Sunday
incredible.
mornings?
Highly recommend it. Okay. So then, from kind of getting to know people, we had a picnic out at a park, probably 2018 or so. And it's a park where a lot of our unsheltered residents sort of live, hang out during the week. And we invited them to come eat with us. They did. It was great. And then my church folks, being good church folks, said, hey, do you want to come to church with us on Sunday morning? Yeah. And these homeless people had the audacity to actually take them up on their offer, right? They showed up. And you can
much
imagine,
to everybody's surprise, right?
Exactly right.
Because we're the Methodist Nerd Podcast, right? We issue invitations to people all the time, but the unexpected, the thing that we don't name in the back of our heads is sometimes when we issue that invitation, we don't expect the person to actually come. Right.
And so thinking about learnings and lessons, don't invite somebody to something if you're not ready to actually receive them.
Amen.
And I think we could have, thank God, I hope we didn't, but we could have done a lot of damage if they would have experienced this hospitality out at the park, and then they show up to our space and all of a sudden you're not welcome here. And so that's,
the hour becomes insular rather than the hour being,
and you're a threat to this instead of being part of our community. And we experienced that a little bit, when this population grew from, there were 4, we kind of had our tokenized unsheltered people that were with us at Central, to when that became 30% of the congregation, 50% of the congregation, power starts to shift a little bit. Folks start to get a little bit uneasy when all of a sudden it's not the cutesy, tokenized, whatever person that I can kind of put in the corner, but this is somebody that now has agency and power and is making decisions about our shared life together. And so, we had to navigate and figure all of that out. Mostly very positive, but some hard conversations. And it's why I'm grateful for our connection, because there were some folks that had to take an exit ramp. And thank God we have other UMCs on the island that we got to say, this is a great church down the street. I think I was the leading evangelist for the other church down the street for a little while, saying, hey, this may be the place you actually want to go. Because it's not for everybody. It is for everybody, but not everybody's ready for that kind of experience of church quite yet.
Talk to me about that season of shifting, right? When you're moving from your 4, potentially tokenized folks to 30% to 50%. You named in our session today that part of the ethos of Central is when you encounter someone, you see what's right with them, right? You see what gift they bring to the table rather than what's wrong with them, right? The impulse is to see the gift.
Right.
Is that something that has been there the whole time, or is it one of the learnings and kind of workings of the Holy Spirit in y'all through this process as you're navigating that shift from 4 to 10% to 30% to 50%?
I think it's always been something that we've tried to hold on to. I think we've done it better and worse during different seasons. COVID made that really hard when we had 2 very distinct churches during that time. We had our worshiping community online, but there was a huge tech barrier for who could participate in that, right? Yeah. And then we continued to have our social services. So we weren't doing corporate worship, but we still opened the building for food, shower, laundry services, our medical clinic, all of that. So it became almost 2 churches during that time. So when we came back together, it was this fascinating, new folks that had joined the online worshiping community during COVID had no idea they were going to be sitting in the pews next to unsheltered people on Sunday mornings. And our homeless people had no idea this was even a church, right? Because we weren't doing corporate worship kind of thing. So we had to be really intentional about how are we thinking about this together? How are we not doing the classic kind of charitable piece where I have, you need, and we're doing this very transactional thing, which creates a hierarchy.
Sure.
Explicitly or implicitly.
Ministry to rather than ministry with.
Right. And the implicit thing is I'm better than you, right? And you have nothing to offer here. This is the first church I've ever served, Daniel, where the folks that receive services from us also show up on Sunday mornings. I've never had that experience before, and that may be more common other places. But the churches I was a part of previously, and I think it was because of this like psychological trauma of I'm not welcome here because I don't have the same things to offer, because we've limited what that means, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And so I'm going to go somewhere else to have my spiritual needs met. When, like you said, we can start with what's right with you. Everybody has something to offer.
Yeah.
I mean, I was telling a story about Ricky, who runs our bicycle shop, who can't read or write. And again, he was the most introverted, sitting in the corner, not engaging with anybody. But when we discovered his gift at fixing bicycles, then now we have, bikes coming in and out of that place like crazy.
Yeah.
He just lit up. Something within him literally lit up to where now he is more social than he was before. He stays the whole time. He's talking with other people. And I joked in the session that like trying to get him to leave is my biggest challenge on Tuesdays and Thursdays, because he's just so chatty now, which is great.
Well, I have to admit, as you were walking through in the session, all of the things Central does. And I know you've got a team. I know you've got an associate who's in her first full year. Just finished her first full year with y'all?
No, she's been with us since 2020. So, and we use, just to be, because I want to honor her, we use the language of co-pastor, which is great. No, you wouldn't have known that. So, yeah. Okay.
There were moments in your detailing of all the things that Central does that I said, when does Michael sleep? And it may still be a very relevant question, but I think part of this default spirit that says, I will see what every person has to bring to the table, and I will empower them to bring that to the table, makes Central, no matter how amazing and gifted you are, and you are, clearly, it makes the ability of that community to be impactful in its community so infinitely greater. Does that make sense?
Hugely so.
Yeah.
I think when Jesus said to the disciples, you will do greater things than this, right? I don't think necessarily it was about the magnitude of miracles that like, okay, Jesus walked on water, I'm going to like walk up a waterfall or something like that.
Right.
I think it was more, if we can get people plugged in, if we can get people empowered by the Spirit, the work the church can do, because there are more people involved, can be greater than even what Jesus did as sort of one person walking on this earth, right? So the church, I think, has been incredibly negligent in looking at these gifts in other people in our communities or in non-traditional kind of spaces. And we're shooting ourselves in the own foot when we have all of this like human capital available to help us live out our mission that often we haven't tapped into because of phobias or fears, or they don't fit our particular box or whatever that is. But when we can unleash that, all of a sudden I find myself on a Thursday when our clinic is running and there's showers going and laundry's happening and a meal is being served and the VA is doing their thing and there's hundreds of people in the building. I'm twiddling my thumbs being like, I don't know what to do today, you know? What a gift that is, you know? And it hasn't always been the case. The first couple of years there was nobody else.
Sure.
But to enter into this season where like, I don't know if I'm needed here anymore. What a tremendous gift that is, you know?
Well, it frees you on days like today to go tell the good story and invite others into that kind of meaningful ministry as well.
Exactly right. And usually when I do these sessions, it didn't work for this time, but I have a co-teacher that comes with me, and it's usually one of our folks from the streets that'll help do that. So I introduced y'all to Chris Mason. He taught a TMF group a couple weeks ago and was just phenomenal.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have any of the schooling that I have or any of the degrees, but he knows so much more than I do about what life is like in Galveston, how to reach folks that I can't reach or talk to. We need each other.
Well, I loved in the session, you walked through kind of his rap sheet.
Yeah.
And
it's like a
CVS
gifts, receipt. It just keeps going and going.
And yet each thing represents a skill or a type of learning, right, that can be utilized for good or for trouble, right? And y'all are in the business of partnering with the Spirit to unleash that for God's goodness and the goodness of the people in the community. That's
right. Nothing's wasted.
No.
Nothing's wasted. So how can we get somebody to leverage? How can you get the local drug dealer to leverage his marketing skills on behalf of the church, right? How do you get the, the gang leader who clearly has experience in like managing people groups, right? How do you get them leading small groups in discipleship and things? I mean, it's the same skill set, right? Yeah. For the most part. Like, I don't want to think I'm a gang leader at the church or something like that, but you know, it's the same kind of basic process that
It's people working with people.
That's what
right?
it is.
It's just shift in the focus and motivation,
Yeah.
right? In a way.
Yeah.
You hinted at a number of these. You talk about unleashing the gifts and of all of the community, both internally within the church, right? The gifts of people like Chris and Ricky and so many more. But you also leverage quite a few community partnerships as a part of this. You mentioned the VA a little bit earlier. Share with our listeners a little bit about some of the community-wide partnerships that help make the ministry of Central happen. And then after you share a little bit about that, tell us a little bit about like the development timeline and process for, between 2014 and today.
Good.
When those came into being.
Great questions. Yeah, I'm not sure that Central does much of anything, honestly, except unlock the doors and open them, which has been kind of cool, That's not totally true. But I really see my job and the church's job is to be like community connector. The church, I think, historically has been the kind of center of the community where arts and community care and all these kind of things came through. And for whatever reason, we've divested of that and let the nonprofit sector kind of take over all of that. And we've carved out this little niche that said, this is your spiritual life, right? And this is what we're in the business of, where I think your spiritual life is your actual life, right? People early on with our medical clinic, well-intended board members asked, why are we doing this? Like, we don't need to be doing this. This is outside of the scope of what a church does. But again, no, I think this is right within one of our core values at Central is care for the whole person, which means it's hard to follow Jesus if you're sick all the time. It's hard to follow Jesus if you're hungry all the time. It's hard to follow Jesus if you don't have a place to sleep. And so I think these things are deeply intertwined. So partnerships, cool story. 2021, we had that terrible freeze in Texas, if you remember. We had snow on the beach in Galveston, which was the weirdest kind of experience. It was during COVID. And so our partners like Salvation Army, places that typically house people had COVID restrictions. And so we're not going to be able to take on the full capacity of people that were living outside, and the city wasn't doing anything. And so we talked to our board and we opened up the church for about a week and let 60 or so folks stay in the church with us. It's the most awkward sleepover I've ever been a part of, but it's incredible. We had no power, right? So we had no heat, we had no water. So we were using buckets. We were getting water from our neighbor's pool to manually flush the toilets with buckets. We were using kind of gas stoves but we kept people alive for a week and it was incredible. And it made the Washington Post picked it up and Duke did a story about it. The provost from UTMB got my number and said, I keep hearing about this place called Central. My students keep talking about it. We read about it in the paper. And his exact words were, we can't afford to not be a part of what you're doing over there. So this is one of the uppity ups at the University of Texas Medical Branch, talking to my little dinky church, saying we can't afford to not be a part of what you're doing. And so the power shift that happened there, where now Central gets to be in the driver's seat for how are we thinking about a partnership between us and UTMB, was really incredible. So as we're drafting MOUs and we begin this kind of partnership and decided we really need to provide medical care because our folks are using the emergency room as their PCP, and that creates frustration for everybody. The ER docs are not set up to do that, and our folks aren't getting what they need, and so they're just angry at each other when it's a broken down system, and it's expensive. And so what if we started a satellite clinic where folks could have those needs? We don't have to wait till those needs become sort of emergency level needs, but we could address them ahead of time. So Grace Clinic was born out of that. And this is a partnership with UTMB, Family Service Center, which is one of the oldest mental health providers in the state of Texas, provides free counseling for our folks. The VA is there. St. Vincent's House, which is another kind of community organization that provides food and medical care and things, partners with us. We really just opened the doors and said, if you're aligned with our mission and vision, come be a part of what we're doing. And it doesn't need to have Central's name on it. It doesn't need to have Michael's name on it. If our folks are getting what they need, I could care less. We can call it the Daniel service for what, you know what I mean? Like let's just get our folks what we need. So we threw the doors wide open. And then even like community partners, like businesses, we have, there's a couple of rental companies because Airbnbs are a big thing in Galveston right now. So when they get towels, they get frays that are not appropriate for guests, they'll donate them to us, right? Or we have clothing that comes in. Moody Methodist comes and runs our clothes closet. The Unitarians run our shower and laundry ministry. Rabbi Peter is at worship with us on Sundays. We've got the Buddhists that are there leading meditation classes on Tuesdays. Like it's this holistic, eclectic nonsense, doesn't make any sense kind of thing. But I think the power of story and our like common humanity has been really like cohesive for folks wanting to be a part of what we're doing there. So big organizations like UTMB, and then just like small teeny tiny partnerships with like the Unitarian Fellowship down the street. It's been really powerful.
That is powerful and beautiful, and I love that it is creating space for ministry to happen in a way that wouldn't happen if it was just up to y'all. Right. And it becomes kingdom work, not castle work.
Yes.
And so often we get focused, and I think it comes from the best of intentions, but we get focused on how do we build the castle, right? We showed up when worship attendance is 4, now it's 6. We grew by 50%. Our castle got bigger.
Exactly right.
You mentioned earlier when you're looking at community partnerships that you're kind of open to anything if it meets the needs of the people and fits within the core values of Central.
Yeah.
When I visited Central with my TMF group a couple years ago, you named those kind of core values for us and the way that they shape and form ministry there. Can you narrate those for us now and kind of give us a sense of where those get operational? Because I think sometimes we have assumptions as to what church is, but then we don't. We may need to, in our own local context, do the work of clarifying not only what are our, stated values, but what are some of the presumed values that live underneath the surface.
Good. So we have 5 explicit values because I can only remember one hand's worth of stuff, and they all start with C because also I can't remember anything else. So let's see if I can get these 5. The first one is curiosity is one of our core values. I had an Old Testament professor that said that, we all think love is like the chief Christian virtue. Love, 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 love. He said, no. He said, curiosity is actually the chief Christian virtue.
Okay.
Because if I'm going to love you, Daniel, I got to know something about you. And if I'm going to know something about you, I have to be at least curious enough to take a step and move towards you, right? Yeah. And so curiosity has really been that thing that tears down those walls that we like to put up as humans that say, this is our group, this is our tribe, this is our whatever. And so we may have a community member who's acting inappropriately, and instead of it going immediately to like punitive discipline, whatever, curiosity forces me to say, I wonder what's going on here. And I wonder if there's more to the story.
Subsurface. Yeah.
Exactly right. The thing is never the thing, right? It's always the thing below the thing. And so that's been really helpful for us. And not just with like unsheltered people, but with like just difficult middle-class congregants, like, right? I mean, curiosity is really helpful. Exactly, the extra grace required. That's been super helpful too. So moving towards, and I'm a word nerd, and so curiosity I always assume came from the Latin word cur, C-U-R, which is like cur deus homo, why the God-man. So cur means why in Latin, why, which makes sense for curiosity. You'd be asking those questions. Yeah. But it actually comes from the Latin word cura, C-U-R-A, which is where we get our English word cure, or to heal. So there's something about curiosity that whenever I'm curious about you and we move towards each other, it seems that's where the divine shows up and that's where healing might start to take place. Brene Brown says people are hard to hate up close. Amen. And so what if we move towards each other? And I didn't like you at all before this podcast, but this has been a great experience.
We're much physically closer together, and so it works. Well, and I can't remember who it is now, but as we draw closer to each other, we also draw nearer to God.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And there is that I love that curiosity is connected
beautiful?
to cure. It's so
I wish
beautiful.
I made that up, but I didn't. It's
but
like
that's
Latin,
okay.
So,
it's all right.
But it's almost like a triangle. I've seen this like problematic marriage diagrams kind of thing. But like if God is at the top, like as we are moving closer to each other, right, we are at the same time moving towards God in that moment. I think that's exactly what you're communicating. Yeah. So. It's beautiful.
A beautiful gift.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the first C.
Okay, that's just number 1. Curiosity. Creativity is one of our values. We serve the most creative being that's ever existed, right? And so part of what it means to be made in the image of God, I think, is for us to be creative as well. And that's like artsy-fartsy creative stuff. So we have lots of art programs at Central because art's incredibly therapeutic and healing. I've got a woman that attends. Her name is Diana, and she was incarcerated, shared a prison cell with Andrea Yates. I don't know if you remember the story. She was in Houston, like drowned her 5 or 7 kids. Really traumatic story because she felt like somebody was telling her to do that. So they shared a prison cell together. And this woman has memories, Diana does, of singing Father Abraham to Andrea Yates as she's fallen asleep each night and doing art projects with Andrea. And they were able to like process their trauma together through art. Okay. And so we want to incorporate that into what we do. And so lots of ways that shows up through occupational therapy, through a grant that we just wrote with the Galveston Arts Center where folks can create art, display art. We're trying a photo voice project right now where we're giving folks cameras
Okay.
and giving them a theme. Like, what does home mean for you? What does family mean for you?
Yeah.
Go take pictures of this.
Okay.
And then we'll display that, and you can kind of curate and tell your own story. It's also problem-solving creativity. So, because we have some folks that hear that like, well, I'm not creative. I can't sing. I can't dance.
And what they're saying is I'm not artsy-fartsy.
Right.
Yeah.
But I need engineers that can look at things like our building that's fallen apart, that's got skylights that aren't supposed to be there, right? And just say, what are we going to do about this?
Yeah.
Or when we buy a frat house and we're going to turn it into transitional housing, I need somebody that can think through that kind of programming in that process. How are we going to tackle something like homelessness in Galveston? So we need those also creative problem solvers as well as our kind of creative artists.
Okay.
And it's really the same thing, right? It's just whether you're using paint as a medium or like the human experience as a medium, it's the same kind of thing. So creativity, community is one.
Yeah.
So the church is first and foremost not a building. It's not a location on Google Maps. Like, it's a group of people, right? And so what community really forces us to do is all the like chummy, we belong to each other, blah, blah, blah. But also to ask, what does that mean? And Gustavo Gutierrez, the great liberation theologian, was talking about the idea of neighboring, which is similar to community.
Yeah, yep.
And so he asked that question, who is my neighbor? And he says, neighbor isn't the person I find myself in proximity to. It's who I intentionally put in the path before me, right?
Yeah.
So for us, then it's like that question earlier on about who's being left out, who's not included in this.
Yeah.
How do I intentionally put them in my path so that they might become a part of this beloved community as well? I don't like to think of myself as the pastor of Central. Like I think I'm Galveston's pastor, and not in an arrogant like I'm Galveston's pastor, but the world is my parish kind of stuff. Yeah. And what we do isn't just confined to 3308 Avenue 0.5, right? It's much bigger and broader than that. Last two, care for the whole person we mentioned.
Yep.
So your spiritual life is your actual life. That's like we do things like substance use disorder clinics, medical clinics, and all those things, feeding people. I'm convinced Jesus was probably a really good preacher. I haven't heard him, but we have some recordings of that. But every time he goes and talks to people, there's always food that's there too, right? Yeah. And so you wonder if the people showed up, like, because he was meeting this physical need. Yeah. And it's hard to listen to God's voice whenever your stomach is growling, right? So I think those things go hand in hand. Care for the whole person. And the last one is collaboration, which is what we've been talking about. Yep. So the church is not, we live on an island, Galveston Island, but we are not an island, right? So we have to be making inroads and partnerships with the traditional folks and with non-traditional folks. Like, partnered with the farmer's market recently, who's going to put in beds in our backyard so our folks can have fresh produce because we live in a food desert. Like, those are interesting. They're not church people. They're never going to show up at Central on Sundays. Right. They're doing God's work in our community.
They're partnering with you to meet the needs of the people.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
As we wrap up today, I'd love, do you have a word of encouragement or recommendation for the good Methodist nerds who find themselves on the other side of these cameras today, as they begin to think, wow, Central's doing some amazing things that may feel like too much for me to take on today, but what is the next faithful thing I can do today?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. The luxury of podcasts like this and getting to do keynotes is I only tell the really great successful stories because we only have 45 minutes, right? Yeah. If we had 3 days together, I could tell you all of the failures and the false starts that we've had. So I would just remind folks that, and I'll share this tomorrow in my keynote, when we started, we had 4 people and an annual budget of $40,000. And so if your church has more than 4 people in it, and a budget of more than $40,000, the opportunities are endless. And so how do we stop looking at, like, especially coming off of this affiliation, a really difficult season for a lot of churches, instead of what are we lacking, scarcity, what's missing, it used to be this way, who's here? Yeah. And what kind of gifts, like, have we not tapped into that if we unleashed, who knows what could happen? I had no idea on July 1st of 2014 when I was appointed to Central that any of this would have happened. But it's just that act of what's the next right thing? Yeah. And what's the next right thing? We never set out to become the largest provider of homeless services in Galveston County. I just wanted to be faithful in the next moment of whatever this next decision is. Yeah. And God's been faithful back to us. We talk about our faith in God a lot, but God has tremendous faith in us as well too. Yeah. And so I think to just rest assured that starting with what's right with your community, not what's wrong. I mean, opportunities are endless. I hope folks will hear this and then want to go and just start small, but just start doing things.
Take that next faithful step.
Who knows what could happen? Yeah.
Michael, thank you for your faithfulness at Central, and thank you for being with us here on Pod Strangely Warmed. Until next time, I'm Daniel Hawkins. This has been been Pod Strangely Warm. If you enjoyed our conversation today, know that you can find us anywhere you find podcasts. On Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, any and all the places, we are there. So if you want to continue the good United Methodist conversation that you've been a part of today, find us, like us, rate us, review us, and share with a friend so that the good news that is happening right here in our own midst can amplify even more.